Hi, this is Josh Kulp. This is the video for Daf Shevui for Masechet Ketubot, Daf Ayin Zayin, page 77. And I wanted to go over a section here that might strike a few people as quite controversial for various reasons, and it has, to a certain extent, remained controversial throughout the history of Jewish law. It's something that we've talked about on several occasions, and that is the case of when does the court force a husband to divorce his wife. So on Ayin Zayin, towards the bottom of the first page, we have that statement of Rav Asi, who says that the only case where we force a divorce is where the woman was really forbidden to him. And these are marriages where in Hebrew we would say the Kiddushin Tovsin, the Kiddushin are valid, and yet there is some kind of prohibition violated in the marriage, such as a most famous case would be a divorcee to marry a priest, a Kohen, or a mamzer or mamzeret to marry an Israelite. Those are all cases in which the marriage is valid. In other words, they do need a get, but it is prohibited for the two to stay together according to Jewish law. The problem is that a Mishnah that we've been talking about has a whole list of other cases, including husbands with all sorts of physical defects, where if the woman sues the husband for divorce, they can force him to divorce. And the answer, eventually, as we move down, is that both cases, I'm moving down to the bottom of the page, really in both cases, the court can force with shote, with physical violence. And the difference is that in the case of a prohibited marriage, in the case of not a prohibited marriage, in the case of mumim, of physical defects, if she wants to, she can stay with him. We don't force a woman who doesn't want to get divorced, and we don't force her husband to divorce her. But in the case of a woman who is infertile, we do force them to divorce, and this is one of the points that I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about 3 points. First of all, it is quite clear from the Gemara that divorce was enforced, right? And that is generally speaking, the accepted pshat, simple reading of the Gemara is that divorce could be enforced even through violence. We don't do that anymore. The court doesn't really whip or beat people, but jail would be a sort of a type of violence. Had rabbis in the Mishnah or the Talmud had something like jail, we might say that they would have put a husband who doesn't wish to divorce his wife in a case where he's legally obligated to divorce her. They would have put him into jail, which is something that happens in Israeli law. It doesn't happen in America because we have the problem of the separation of church and state, or we have the advantage of the separation of church and state, and therefore the American courts cannot enforce Jewish divorce. But really, the pshat, the simple reading of the Gemara, is that the court should force a husband and has the authority to physically beat him until he says, I want to divorce her, something we've talked about several times. The second thing I wanted to talk about is this case of the woman who was infertile. According to a simple reading of the Gemara, if the husband and wife both want to stay married, but they cannot have children, they are forced to divorce. And this is a level of intervention in people's private lives that I think most people wouldn't countenance. And the truth is, through most of halachic history, Jews have not countenanced either. I don't know of any stories in post-Talmudic history, any stories over well over 1,000 years, where a husband was forced to divorce his wife because she wasn't fertile. Now, I'm not saying there weren't cases where she couldn't sue for divorce because he wasn't fertile. In other words, if she wanted to, then they could force the divorce. And of course, if he wanted to divorce her because he felt that she wasn't fertile, well, he always has the right. I'm talking about a case where both the man and the woman wish to stay together, and the court nevertheless says, because you have a duty to procreate, we are not going to allow you to stay together. That simply wasn't a halacha that was observed throughout Jewish history, but nevertheless it shows you, at least here theoretically, the value of procreation in the rabbi's eyes, that even a couple who wishes to stay together would be physically forced to separate because they cannot fulfill that mitzvah.